If you're choosing between the Insta360 X6 and DJI Osmo 360 II, there's one comparison that doesn't show up on the spec sheet but could matter a lot if you record long 8K videos: heat. Because in a recent side-by-side test, the DJI became dramatically hotter than the Insta360 after just a few minutes of recording. At first glance, that sounds like an easy win for the X6. But there's a problem with that conclusion. A hotter camera isn't automatically a camera that overheats sooner. In fact, it could actually mean the body is doing a better job moving heat away from the processor and sensors. So today we're going to look at the temperature numbers, explain what they actually tell us, what they don't tell us, and then compare the real advantages and disadvantages of both cameras after launch. For this test, both cameras were set to panoramic 8K at 30 frames per second in the same indoor environment, with the room temperature around 28 degrees Celsius. Before recording started, they were almost identical. The Insta360 X6 measured around 32.2 degrees on the screen and roughly 33 degrees on the rear. The DJI Osmo 360 II was around 32.8 degrees at the display and approximately 34 degrees on the back, so we're talking about barely any meaningful difference before the cameras started working. Then, both cameras recorded continuously for roughly 12 to 13 minutes, and this is where the numbers separated quite dramatically. The X6 reached around 41 degrees Celsius at the screen and about 46, 8 degrees on the rear. The Osmo 360 II climbed to approximately 46.4 degrees on the display and a very noticeable 54.5 degrees on the back. That's almost an 8-degree difference at the rear of the cameras. If you simply look at those temperatures, the obvious conclusion would be that the X6 has much better thermal management. And from the perspective of how comfortable the camera feels in your hand, that's absolutely fair. A body temperature above 54 degrees Celsius is going to feel significantly hotter than something sitting below 47 degrees. But one viewer under the original test made an extremely important point, and I think this needs to be part of any proper discussion about overheating. They basically asked, why didn't you keep recording until one of the cameras actually stopped? And they're right. Surface temperature and overheating are two different measurements. If camera A reaches 55 degrees on the outside while camera B stays at 47, that doesn't automatically mean camera A's processor is hotter. It may mean camera A is transferring more internal heat into the chassis and dissipating it through the body. Camera B could theoretically have a cooler exterior while keeping more heat trapped internally. So this test proves something useful. The DJI gets much hotter to the touch during 8K 30 recording. It does not, by itself, prove that DJI will thermal shutdown before the X6. The proper overheating test would be much longer. Same settings, same room, same batteries, same screen brightness, Wi-Fi configuration and airflow, then let both cameras continue recording until either the battery dies, recording ends because of thermal limits, or both complete the test normally. That gives us recording endurance. Surface temperatures are still useful, but they answer a different question. And interestingly, independent X6 testing gives us a bit more context here. In one recent long duration test, the X6 recorded just under 155 minutes at 8K 30 without overheating. At 8K 50, however, it started reaching thermal limits after roughly 20 to 25 minutes at a time under stress test conditions. That tells us something important. Even a camera with excellent 8K 30 endurance can behave very differently once you push the frame rate higher. Real-world airflow while cycling or skiing can also improve cooling significantly compared with a stationary indoor test. So instead of saying X6 doesn't overheat and DJI does, I think the more accurate takeaway right now is this. The X6 clearly runs cooler externally at 8K 30 in this particular test, while actual shutdown endurance still needs to be compared under identical conditions. And heat is only one part of the buying decision. Let's move to DJI's biggest advantage, because honestly, it remains difficult to ignore: value. The Osmo 360 II launched in Hong Kong at HKD 3,899, which converts to roughly $499. The Insta360 X6 officially sells for $699.99 in the United States. Obviously, DJI's converted launch price isn't an official US MSRP because the Osmo 360 II isn't normally available there right now, but in markets where both products become officially available at similar regional pricing, that is a substantial difference. And DJI isn't giving you an obviously stripped-down product for that lower price. You get native 8K 60 recording, 10-bit color, D-Log M, replaceable lenses, AI Super Night 2.0, 4K 240 panoramic slow motion, raw photography, and 120 megapixel panoramic stills. DJI officially lists 14.5 stops of maximum dynamic range under its test conditions, along with its latest stabilization and tracking features. Internal storage is another major advantage. DJI gives you 128 GB built in, with around 105 GB actually available. The X6 gives you roughly 47 GB usable. Both support expandable storage, so this isn't a deal breaker for Insta360. But more than twice the internal space is extremely useful if you forget a card or unexpectedly fill one while you're shooting. DJI also gives you its familiar quick-release ecosystem, which makes switching between selfie sticks, mounts, and other Osmo accessories extremely fast. If you're already using DJI microphones, direct Osmo audio integration is another advantage because you can keep this setup very small. Then we have the replaceable lenses. Both companies have now solved one of the biggest weaknesses of older 360 cameras. The X6 uses Insta360's updated replaceable lens system, while DJI has finally moved to replaceable lenses on the Osmo 360 II and added an upgraded scratch-resistant coating as well. So whichever camera you buy, scratching one exposed fisheye lens no longer automatically means you've destroyed an expensive camera. Where Insta360 starts fighting back is the overall experience. The X6 uses dual custom 111" square sensors and shoots up to 8K 50. It also brings full 10-bit workflows, native Dolby Vision iLog, improved low-light processing, and a much more mature software ecosystem for 360 content. The new X6 sensors provide roughly 33% more sensor area than the X5, and independent reviews have generally found meaningful improvements in low light, detail, and overall image quality. Battery endurance also appears to be one of the X6's strengths. Insta360 advertises around 140 minutes at 8K 30, and independent testing has actually exceeded that in some conditions. DJI officially rates the Osmo 360 II at up to 100 minutes of continuous 8K 30 under its laboratory setup. Again, testing methodologies differ, so I wouldn't compare those numbers as perfectly equivalent, but if your priority is recording very long 8K 30 clips, the X6 currently has a strong argument. The X6 is also waterproof to 20 meters without an additional housing, while DJI rates the Osmo 360 II to 10 meters. Serious underwater 360 shooting still benefits from a proper dive housing because of optical distortion, but as basic protection and for shallow water use, Insta360 gives you more headroom. And then there is probably Insta360's biggest advantage, software. This is something we've talked about in the previous videos, but it's becoming more important rather than less. 360 footage is fundamentally different from normal action camera footage because you're capturing everything and deciding where the camera points afterward. That means editing software is a major part of the product. Insta360 has been refining that workflow for years. The X6 now adds PanoMind, AI Director, Auto Edit, InstaFrame, and the broader zero editing idea. Whether you love AI editing or prefer to manually reframe everything, Insta360 simply has a very mature set of tools around this format. DJI Studio and Mimo are improving quickly, and Spotlight Follow can automatically keep subjects framed when exporting flat videos, but this is still a relatively new category for DJI. If you already have years of Insta360 projects, accessories, and editing habits, that ecosystem has real value. The X6 does have weaknesses beyond price, though the included accessories are relatively basic considering you're spending around $700. Internal storage is limited compared with DJI. Some reviewers have also reported occasional software quirks, and although the X6's 8K 30 endurance is excellent, higher frame rate 8K recording can still trigger thermal limits in stationary stress tests. DJI's obvious weakness from this particular footage is exactly what we started with: it gets hot. A rear temperature around 54.5 degrees Celsius after only around 13 minutes of 8K 30 is noticeable, even if the internal components are operating within safe limits. That much external heat affects how the product feels. If you're hand-holding it immediately after a long recording session, swapping batteries, or using it in already hot environments, it's not something I'd completely dismiss. But again, I would not call that an overheating failure unless the camera actually stops recording or begins restricting functions because of temperature. There's a big difference between runs hot and overheats, and that distinction is probably the most important thing to take away from this test. If I were doing the next round properly, I would run both cameras until they stop, while continuously recording room temperature, surface temperature, battery percentage, and recording duration. Then repeat it at 8K 50 on the X6 and 8K 60 on DJI because that's where both cameras are being pushed much harder. I'd also test them outside with airflow because a stationary indoor camera is basically the worst cooling scenario for an action camera. That would tell us far more than touching both cameras after 12 minutes. So where does that leave the buying decision? If both cameras are officially available where you live and price is your biggest concern, DJI remains incredibly difficult to ignore. You're getting excellent hardware, 8K 60, huge internal storage, and replaceable lenses for substantially less money in its launch markets. If you prioritize long 8K 30 endurance, cooler external temperatures, stronger waterproofing, and the more mature 360 editing ecosystem, the X6 has meaningful advantages that don't appear on a simple 8K 50 versus 8K 60 comparison. And if you're in the United States, there's still another complication. The X6 is officially available through normal retail channels, while the Osmo 360 currently isn't. That can matter more than any specification if you care about straightforward warranty and support. Personally, I think the temperature test actually makes this comparison more interesting rather than giving us an obvious winner. The X6 is clearly cooler externally in this particular 8K 30 test, that's good, but I wouldn't use those numbers alone to say DJI has a bigger overheating problem. For that, we need to answer the question the commenter asked, which camera actually stops recording first? And I think that's exactly the test we should do next. So let me know in the comments, if both cameras were recording 8K continuously in the same room, how long would you expect them to last before overheating, or do you think both will simply run until the battery dies? And between the cooler X6 and the cheaper, higher spec DJI, which one would you actually choose?